3 months ago, something happened during what was supposed to be my first real weekend off in forever. We'd barely started unloading our gear when the guy with the hatchet appeared. I'm Bradley, and I work as a hospital orderly. My roommate Jack had found this cheap camping spot for $40 instead of $200 at some resort. We got to the campground at 5:44 a.m. sharp and claimed our reserved site by the creek. That's when Sean Murphy walked over from across the water, carrying a wood-splitting hatchet like it was part of his morning routine. "You boys are in my spot," he said, not bothering with introductions. Tall guy, maybe 50, wearing hunting gear that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. "Been camping here 15 years. You need to move." "We have a reservation for Site 12, Jack said, showing him our paperwork. Sean looked at the papers like they were toilet tissue. "Don't care what some office drone told you. This is my area." He shifted the hatchet to his other hand, and I noticed how his knuckles were white around the handle. "You can set up over there in the marsh, or you can leave. Your choice." The marsh he pointed to was 50 yards away, mostly standing water where other campers were dealing with soggy gear, but it was the way he said "your choice" that made my stomach clench. I'd seen that look before in hospital patients' families when rational thinking shut down and something primitive took over. "Look, we drove 3 hours to get here," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "We paid for this specific site, and I'm telling you to get the hell off my land." Sean took a step closer, raising the hatchet to chest level, not quite threatening but definitely not casual. "You've got 10 minutes to pack up and get out, or I'll help you pack." Jack was already backing toward our car, smart move. But Sean was between us and our exit route, and I realized how isolated we really were. The nearest other campers were hundreds of yards away, and with the creek noise, no one would hear us unless we really made noise. "We're not looking for trouble," I said. "Too late for that." Sean's eyes had that glassy look I'd seen in psych patients before they got violent. "You came into my woods, set up in my spot, acted like you owned the place. That's trouble." He raised the hatchet higher, and I could see dried wood chips stuck to the blade. This wasn't just a tool he was carrying. He'd been using it recently, and he was comfortable with it in his hands. 10 minutes, he repeated. "Starting now." That's when I made the decision that probably saved our lives. I screamed. Not words, just pure volume. The loudest yell I could manage, aimed across the water toward the other campsites. "Help! Help us! Campsite 12!" Sean's head snapped around like he'd been slapped. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Someone help us!" I screamed again. "He's got a weapon!" Within seconds, I heard voices responding from across the campground. Flashlight beams appeared through the trees, people calling back, asking what was wrong. Sean looked at the hatchet in his hand, then at the approaching lights. Something seemed to break in his expression, the predatory confidence replaced by the sudden realization that witnesses were coming. "This isn't over," he said, but he was already backing away toward the tree line. "I know where you're camped. I'll be watching." He disappeared into the woods just as 3 other campers reached our site, asking what was happening. We told them everything, the threats, the weapon, how he'd claimed our reserved site as his territory. They helped us pack and escorted us to the parking area. The park rangers found Sean's campsite empty the next morning. He'd packed up and left in the dark, but not before he'd used that hatchet to chop down a small pine tree and drag it across the access road to our site. His final message. We spent the night in Jack's car with the doors locked, taking turns staying awake to watch for headlights. Every sound made us jump. Other campers walking to the bathrooms, wind in the trees, anything that might be Sean coming back to finish what he'd started. The rangers told us later that Sean Murphy wasn't even registered at the campground. He'd been squatting in the area for weeks, driving off other campers who tried to use his spots. They'd been looking for him after several complaints, but he always disappeared before they could find him. I still think about that weekend sometimes, especially during long hospital shifts. How quickly things can turn dangerous when you meet someone who's decided you don't belong in their world. Some people just can't share what they think belongs to them, and some people will do anything to make sure you remember that. We never went back to that campground. And I never ignore warning signs anymore, no matter how much money I've spent or how far I've driven. When someone shows you who they are with a weapon in their hand, believe them the first time. If you ever find yourself alone at a popular campground, remember this story. I returned from a 20-minute trail walk to find a man coming out of my tent. I'm Barbara, and I babysit for families in town to help pay for college. When my landlord Catherine mentioned this campground at Quail Run, I decided to treat myself to a solo weekend. I'd been there 2 days when Scott Taylor Murphy, the park maintenance worker, started showing up at my campsite uninvited. The first incident happened while I was cooking dinner. Scott appeared at my picnic table, claiming he needed to check the fire ring for damage, but he lingered, making comments about how I was too pretty to be camping alone and asking personal questions about where I lived, if I had a boyfriend. When I said I preferred to keep to myself, his expression hardened. "Lot of weirdos in these woods," he said, stepping closer than necessary. "Girl like you needs someone looking out for her." The way he said it didn't sound like protection. It sounded like a threat. That evening, I decided to move campsites. The camp office moved me to Site 23, more isolated, but still within reasonable distance of other campers. I was congratulating myself on handling the situation when Scott showed up at my new site the next afternoon. "Heard you moved?" he said, and there was something different in his voice now, sharper. "This spot's real private. No one comes back here much." "How did you know I moved here?" I asked. "Part of my job, keeping track of who's where." But the way he said it didn't sound like safety. "You know, I get off work around 6. Might get lonely out here all by yourself." When I firmly declined his suggestion to show me around, his friendly mask slipped completely. Something cold showed underneath. "You sure? Might regret being rude to someone who's just trying to help." After he left, I seriously considered going home, but I'd paid for 3 nights and I needed this break. I decided to take a short walk to clear my head, just 20 minutes on the nearby trail loop. When I got back, I saw someone emerging from my tent. Scott Taylor, standing right there next to my campsite, clearly having just exited my tent. He froze when he saw me, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and then defiance. "Oh, hey," he said, like this was perfectly normal. "Thought I heard something in your tent. Raccoons, you know how they get. Was just checking for damage." But I could see my sleeping bag was rumpled differently than I'd left it. My backpack was unzipped when I specifically remembered zipping it closed. He'd been going through my things. "Get away from my campsite," I said, my voice shaking. "Now hold on, I was just trying to help." "Get away," I said louder. Scott's expression darkened. "You don't need to be rude. I'm just doing my job, making sure campers are safe." He took a step toward me. "Lot of things can happen to a girl alone in the woods." The way he said it was definitely a threat now. I realized how isolated this campsite really was, how far I'd have to scream for anyone to hear me. Scott was bigger than me, stronger, and he had access to the entire campground. He could go anywhere, claim he was working. "Where you going?" he asked as I started backing toward the main trail. "We should talk about this. You're being unreasonable." That's when I ran, just turned and sprinted toward the populated part of the campground, crashing through brush and not caring how much noise I made. Behind me, I could hear Scott calling my name, his voice getting closer. "Barbara, come back here. You're making a mistake." I didn't stop until I reached the group of RVs near the front of the campground, where families were cooking dinner and kids were riding bikes. Normal people doing normal things. I must have looked wild, because several people immediately asked if I was okay. I told them about Scott, about finding him in my tent, and one of the RV families let me use their phone to call the camp office. But when the manager came to find Scott, his supervisor said he'd already left for the day, said he'd mentioned some kind of situation with a difficult camper and had asked to leave early. The manager offered to move me to a site right next to the camp office, but I was done. I packed up that night and drove home, checking my mirrors the whole way to make sure no park maintenance vehicle was following me. A week later, Catherine told me she'd heard from another friend that there had been some trouble with a maintenance worker at Quail Run. Apparently, I wasn't the first solo female camper to have problems. The guy had been fired, but not before several women had complained about him entering their campsites uninvited. Trust your instincts. If someone's behavior feels wrong, it probably is. And if you catch someone coming out of your tent, don't worry about being polite. Run. Never tell clients your personal plans, especially demanding ones who don't take no for an answer. I was just finishing setting up camp when Tiffany Walker emerged from the woods carrying a knife. I'm Rowan, and I do building maintenance for a property management company. Tiffany was a client in Unit 3B at the Shadowbrook complex, always calling about something. The last time I was there fixing a cabinet, she'd gotten too personal, asking about my dating life. When I mentioned I was planning a camping trip to get away from the city, she got this weird look and asked where I like to camp. I shouldn't have told her about the spot near Shadowbrook Lake, but I was trying to be polite. The way she said, maybe I should try camping sometime, felt less like casual interest and more like a plan. So when I arrived at my usual isolated clearing Friday evening after that emergency drill at work, I wasn't completely shocked to see a car parked nearby. But I was shocked when Tiffany walked out of the trees toward my campsite, carrying camping gear and a 4-inch blade. "Rowan, what a coincidence," she said, like running into me 50 miles from town was the most natural thing in the world. The knife was in her right hand, not threatening exactly, but visible. I can't believe we picked the same spot. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. The campground covered hundreds of acres, and she'd found my exact location, a spot that wasn't even visible from the main road. "How did you find this place?" I asked. "Oh, you described it so well when you were fixing my cabinet. Had to see it for myself." She looked around my campsite like she was planning to stay. "You were right about it being quiet. Real private." "Actually, I came here to be alone," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Maybe you could find a spot closer to the main campground?" Her smile faltered, and I noticed how she shifted her grip on the knife. "That's not very friendly. I thought we got along well. We have a professional relationship. You're my client. I fix things in your apartment. That's it." Tiffany's expression darkened. "I see. So I'm good enough to call when your company wants my money, but not good enough to be camping neighbors?" "It's not like that. I just prefer camping alone." "Well, I'm here now," she said, stepping closer. The knife caught the evening light. "And this is public land. I can camp wherever I want." I realized she was right about the public land, but everything about this felt wrong. The way she'd tracked down my exact location, the way she was holding that blade, the look in her eyes. I started thinking about getting to my truck, but she was between me and the vehicle. "Look, Tiffany, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," she said, moving even closer. "I like you, Rowan. Thought maybe you liked me too, the way you always stayed to talk when you came to fix things." I was being polite. It's part of my job. "Your job?" Her voice got sharp, and she raised the knife slightly. "Is that all I am to you? Just another job?" The temperature was dropping as the sun went down, but I was sweating. Tiffany didn't seem to notice the cold. She was focused entirely on me, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. "I think you should leave," I said. "I think you should give me a chance." She moved close enough that I could smell her perfume. "We could have a nice evening together. Talk, get to know each other better." "No, I want you to leave. Now." That's when everything changed. The fake smile disappeared completely, and something ugly took its place. "You can't just use people, Rowan. You can't be nice to me for months and then act like I'm nothing." She pointed the knife at my chest. "You made me think you cared." When I tried to step around her toward my truck, she moved to block my path. For the first time, I really looked at her size compared to mine. I'm not a big guy, and she was taller than I'd realized, strong-looking, and now she had a weapon. "We're going to talk about this," she said. "You owe me that much." When I tried to push past her, she grabbed my arm with her free hand, hard enough to hurt. "Don't touch me," I said, pulling away. "I came prepared for camping," she said, waving the knife. "You never know what you might need in the woods." That's when I spotted my tire iron leaning against my truck, maybe 3 feet away. If I could get to it. "You're right," I said, trying to buy time. "Maybe we should talk." "I knew you'd see reason." She relaxed slightly, lowering the knife. I lunged for the tire iron and came up swinging. Not to hurt her seriously, just to get her away from me and clear a path to my truck. The iron caught her wrist and she dropped the knife with a scream. "You bastard!" she yelled, cradling her injured wrist. "I just wanted to talk." I didn't stick around to hear more. I grabbed my keys and jumped in the truck, locking the doors as Tiffany pounded on the windows, screaming about how I'd led her on, how this wasn't over. I drove straight to the police station. Turned out Tiffany had a history of this kind of behavior with other service workers. They arrested her the next morning. That's why I never tell clients personal information anymore. Because some people can't tell the difference between professional courtesy and personal interest. And when they show up at your campsite with a knife, they're not looking for conversation.